back in 2009, I was over in Normandy working for the BBC on some of their commemorative programming. It was mostly radio stuff, actually. I think it was Radio 4. But there was also some TV stuff, and when I got back from France, I was contacted by the daughter of the subject of this book, and she wrote to me and she said, "Look, I saw you on television, sort of talking about Normandy, about D-Day. And my father was a British Army chaplain who landed on Gold Beach on D+1, so on the 7th of June, and he kept a journal. And would you like to see it?" And I'd written a book about Gold Beach, so I was particularly interested, maybe more so than it had been about some other area of Normandy. So I said, yes, please. And I knew also that he'd been the chaplain to the 120th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment. And although I hadn't done very much about light anti-aircraft or anti-aircraft units generally, I was aware of the broader context, which was that the Allies were concerned, and this sort of surprises some people maybe to a degree, about German air power being brought to bear in a kind of desperate defence of the D-Day beaches, and that therefore the anti-aircraft units were quite interesting. With the benefit of hindsight, it looks bizarre that anybody would have worried about the Luftwaffe in 1944, but at the time the fears were quite genuine. So I thought, well, this could be quite interesting, find out more about light anti-aircraft units, and find out more about chaplains, and I knew nothing about British or anybody else's military chaplains. I'm not a religious person, and I'd never really investigated it. I was aware of military cliches like that there are no atheists in foxholes, and and I was aware that the military chaplains were present and fulfilled functions, but quite what those were and how much they mattered, completely outside my comfort zone. So I just thought it'd be interesting. So we met up and had a look at the diary. I thought, interesting. I thought it's well written, straightforward, uncomplicated. It's not full of piosity or anything like that might perhaps grate. And I thought, this is worth publishing. But I thought it needs editing for various reasons. It starts very abruptly, and it ends equally abruptly. So it needed to be kind of topped and tailed with an introduction and a kind of conclusion or epilogue. And although the writer, Alexander Reynolds, I thought wrote very, very well and very powerfully at times about his own experiences, like a lot of people who write about things they didn't personally witness, there were also occasions within the journal where he said things that I frankly knew were untrue, or at least were distorted and partly inaccurate. So I thought, well, if it's published, these things just need to be corrected, or at least brought to readers' attention that perhaps it didn't quite happen like that. So the journal is really interesting, full of kind of human drama, I suppose, and then the personal perspective. And I've read a lot of books which are more about operations and doctrine and tactics and military technology and so forth. And although there are some terrific personal accounts of the Normandy Campaign, I thought that this was another one which as I say, deserved to be published. I have to do a lot of research. So I, as I say, I knew nothing really about military chaplaincy in general or in Normandy specifically. So I had to get hold of and read and think about the existing literature, so that I could contextualise the things that Reynolds was writing about within a kind of broader understanding. And that allowed me, obviously to write the introduction, which is partly about British military chaplaincy during the Second World War, and better to understand some of the choices that Reynolds made and some of the jobs that he did. For example, searching the corpses of dead soldiers for personal identification, and or setting up reading and reading clubs and things like that. The welfare side of military chaplaincy. So I needed better to understand those sorts of things and understand why Reynolds was doing the things that he did. Also, as I say, the journal stops in November 1944. And Reynolds went on to military occupation duties in Germany in the immediate aftermath of the war. And again, I didn't know very much about that, so I had to find out a little bit about that for the epilogue. I had to understand Reynolds' life better, which meant talking in some detail with his daughter. And she was extremely helpful in providing me with material that helped understand his life story. So these sorts of things helped me to produce quite a lengthy introduction, quite a lengthy epilogue, many footnotes to try to explain things that were going on. So I think the original journal is about, I think I did a word count on it, about 23,000 words, and I think the book is about 60,000. So that tells you, roughly how much of it is my writing, if you like, which is the product of that process. And the editing, I mean, I didn't interfere with the journal at all, really. So that 23,000 words or so of Reynolds, they've not been reordered. I've not excised material. I've not added material. A few things in square brackets just to explain maybe an acronym or something like that. So I wanted to make sure that his voice was absolutely centre stage, that the journal wasn't interfered with to misrepresent or to distort anything that he wrote. That was very important. But it was equally important that readers understood, as I say, various aspects of the context within which Reynolds was writing and describing the things that he saw and did. And also, as I say, it's partly about being a chaplain to a light anti-aircraft regiment. So what do light anti-aircraft regiments do? How do they operate? These things needed to be understood as well. So I looked at all the war diaries, dozens of secondary sources, memoirs and so forth about chaplains and other subjects and so forth. And eventually, after a considerable amount of time and quite a few interruptions along the way, managed to hopefully turn it into a book. So Reynolds' journal covers the period from really May 1944, so just before the invasion, through to November 1944. It was given to me as a single block of text, no chapter headings, subheadings really at all. And once you start adding footnotes and so forth, that's going to make something which is, well, unreadable in a sense to most people. You need to divide it up. And also Reynolds, perhaps in a good way, wrote much more about certain things than he wrote about other things. So the journal is much more about Normandy than it is about the aftermath. So what I needed to do really was break it up. And I broke it up into 4 chapters, each of which covers a particular period. So the chapter leading up to his landing on Gold Beach on D+1, the first period in Normandy during which he underwent some pretty traumatic experiences, I would suggest. Sort of the next period in Normandy when things settled down to more kind of routine work. And then finally a chapter which includes his journal for effectively August 1944 through to November 1944, during which the regiment moved gradually up towards Holland, where it ended up for the end or the last months of the war. So that was the first task. And then at the beginning of each chapter, as you say, essentially to produce a short introduction which says, look, this chapter covers this. These are some of the things which I think are most interesting about it. So draw the reader's attention perhaps to some of the things which I think are particularly interesting or rewarding. And then, as I say, with the introduction and the epilogue, footnotes and various appendices and so forth, hopefully, meet the objectives I set myself. Again, everybody's different, but I think, I'm struck, for example, there are a couple of bits in the first chapter when he's in Normandy, where he's searching bodies of soldiers who are killed on Gold Beach or immediately afterwards, both British and German bodies. And, he's writing about his experiences with, a fair degree of emotional intensity. These were clearly traumatic events. After he's buried the first a few dozen chaps on the afternoon of D+1, he goes back to the regimental headquarters building, which is established just inland from Gold Beach, and he's clearly, traumatised by the events, and, unsurprisingly and probably quite rightly, consumes a fair amount of whiskey that's given to him by the second in command of the battalion to help deal with what he's gone through. There's a bit where he's talking to a very seriously injured British soldier, very badly injured, about what he's going to do when he goes back home, and then the chap is loaded onto an amphibious truck to take him out to one of the hospital vessels to evacuate him back to England, and dies. One of very few, it has to be said, from that dressing station or forward aid station that did die after reaching the medical facilities, but sadly this chap did. And again, he writes about that with a great deal of honesty about his response to that, and it also inspired him. He was a bit of a poet. Wrote poetry on and off various times before and during and after the war, probably. And he wrote a poem about that particular experience, which is included in one of the annexes or appendices to the book. So those sorts of things are particularly powerful, and I think they're the real highlights of the book. Sure. There are others as well like that, but those are two of the ones which stick in my mind. The experience of being a soldier, whether you're a chaplain or any other, isn't necessarily fully representative of the human being's life. As we well know, plenty of servicemen, especially those who've been maybe conscripted within the context of a total war environment, or volunteered even in a total war, they go away, they do their stuff, they have experiences that civilians like me never have. Then they come home and they revert, or they don't, but they're very private about how much they share the harder aspects of their military experiences, maybe. So I wouldn't want to claim that I knew the man. I think that would be arrogant and inaccurate. But I did like the fact that the book isn't overly religious, yeah? What I liked about this chap was that he was a genuinely humane person, and I felt that his real motivation and his skill, his talent, lay in being able to relate to human beings from obviously diverse social backgrounds and life experiences and so forth. And he seems to have been genuinely popular. That comes from various bits of evidence gathered along the way. And he seems to have been mainly interested in helping the soldiers get through their experiences.